The Little Pot by John Stephens. Copyright 2009, John Stephens. Once upon a time, there lived a potter in a little village in the mountains. Next door to the potter's house was his workshop, where many different pieces of pottery were made from wet clay. He gently molded and shaped each piece as it went round and round upon the pottery wheel. Sometimes he called the items vessels. Each vessel was made with love and a special purpose in mind. Some vessels were pitchers to hold cold water. Others became bowls to serve hot soup. One day, the potter began making a little pot. He took special care to make it just the right size, and with his hands, he formed it into the exact shape that he desired. When he finished, he sat back and admired his creation, for he was very pleased. As the potter set the little pot inside the kiln to bake, he said, "Little pot, I have a very special plan for you." The little pot was excited and anxious to see how the potter would use it. It dreamed of the pot it would soon become. Then, several days later, the potter came into the workshop and put some important papers into Little Pot. "Oh yes!" Little Pot exclaimed. "I'm going to be a paper pot. I'm going to be very smart because I will hold all the potter's important papers. I am so happy that the potter is using me. Paper pots are the very best pots to be." But the potter never returned with more papers. Instead, he began forming another vessel. This container seemed bigger and stronger than Little Pot, and when it was finished, the potter filled the new vessel with papers as well. He then picked up Little Pot and dumped all of its papers into the new vessel. The potter had indeed made a vessel to hold his papers, but it was no longer Little Pot. Once again, the Little Pot was empty. It sat on the potter's workbench, wondering why it couldn't have been a paper pot and become very smart. Then the potter said, "Little Pot, you must trust me, for I am preparing you to be a very special pot." So the Little Pot trusted the potter and waited patiently to be filled with something new. A few days later, the potter began to drop coins into the Little Pot. "Oh yes!" Little Pot exclaimed. "I'm going to be a coin pot. I'm going to be very rich and hold all the potter's coins. This must be why the potter stopped giving me his important papers. I am so happy that the potter is using me. Coin pots are the very best pots to be." But the potter never returned with more coins. Instead, he began forming still another vessel. This new container seemed much fancier than Little Pot, and when the potter finished making it, he filled the new vessel with coins as well. He then took all the coins from Little Pot and placed them in the new vessel. The potter had indeed made a vessel to hold his coins, but it was no longer Little Pot. The Little Pot was empty again. It sat on the potter's workbench, wondering why it could not have been a coin pot and become very rich. Then the potter said, "Little Pot, you must trust me, for I am preparing you to be a very special pot." Once again, the Little Pot chose to trust the potter and accept his plan and purpose. Though it did not fully understand, it waited patiently to be filled with something new. One sunny afternoon, a few days later, the potter came in from the garden with a small bucket of soil. Quite to Little Pot's surprise, the potter began to pour the soil into it. At first, Little Pot feared it was becoming dirty and ugly. Then, ever so gently, into the soil. "Oh, yes!" Little Pot exclaimed. "I'm going to be a flower pot. I'm going to be very pretty and grow beautiful flowers. This must be why the potter stopped giving me his important papers and valuable coins. I am so happy that the potter is using me. Flower pots are the very best pots to be." Day after day for several weeks, the potter watered the little green plant and patiently watched it grow. Then an amazing thing happened. Tiny yellow and white blooms began to appear. The little pot thought, "Now I am a flower pot at last." Then more and more flowers appeared, each one very beautiful. Little Pot was so glad that the potter had allowed it to become a flower pot. It could not imagine anything better. But then, in just a few days, the white and yellow flowers began to turn into small green objects. Little Pot became very worried. Without the pretty flowers, how will I remain so beautiful? Thinking back, Little Pot remembered that it had been a paper pot and felt very smart. But the potter took away the papers. It had been a coin pot and felt very rich, and the potter took away its coins. Then it had become a flower pot and felt very beautiful. But now its flowers were changing into strange green objects. The little pot knew the potter would have the answer. It had accepted the potter's plan for its purpose. It had believed the potter when he said everything would turn out all right. It had trusted the potter to care for it because he made it with love. When the potter saw how worried Little Pot looked, he smiled and said, "Little Pot, I've had a plan for you from the very beginning. You are not a paper pot. You are not a coin pot. And you are not a flower pot. You, Little Pot, are a fruit pot." "A fruit pot?" Little Pot exclaimed. Then, as it glanced upward, it noticed that the strange green objects had already become bigger and were turning into shiny red berries. The potter placed the little pot on the windowsill. The sunlight reflected off its bright red berries. The next morning, the potter came by and plucked a few berries to enjoy with his breakfast cereal. How sweet and tasty," he said. The potter was very pleased with the fruit from Little Pot. With a great big smile, Little Pot said, "I am so glad the potter is using me. Fruit pots are the very best pots to be." A note from the author. Like Little Pot, you too were made for a very special purpose. And as you trust, believe, and accept God's plan for your life, you will become a vessel that bears fruit. In Galatians 5:22 and 23, it says, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control.